A winter blizzard swallowed the mountains of Montana, erasing roads, tracks, and hope. A 45-year-old former Navy SEAL thought he had chosen this isolation to escape the world until his German Shepherd suddenly stopped frozen in the snow. Hanging from a tree ahead were two women barely alive, left there for winter to finish the job. No accident, no rescue coming, and no sign of who had done this or why. As the wind howled and the cold closed in, the SEAL realized something far worse than the storm was still out there, and it was watching. If you believe compassion can rewrite destiny, like the video, subscribe for more stories and comment where you're watching, see where this story will go. Winter sealed the mountains of Montana beneath a blizzard so thick it erased road sound and any sense of direction, turning the forest into a white void where time itself seemed to slow. Michael Turner had chosen this place because nothing followed you here. At 45, he lived alone in a weather-beaten log cabin buried deep beyond marked trails, a structure built to endure rather than comfort. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, even now, though age and war had settled weight into his posture. His face was sharply cut, cheekbones pronounced, jaw squared beneath a rough, untrimmed beard flecked with gray. His eyes, pale and steady, carried the distant focus of a man who never fully stood down. He wore the same clothes every day, as if change itself required effort. A heavy, dark brown leather jacket scarred and softened by years of use, a red and navy flannel shirt beneath it, faded jeans worn thin at the knees, insulated leather boots crusted with old salt and snow, and a gray wool scarf wrapped tight against his throat. He did not come to Montana to heal. He came so he would no longer be asked to choose who lived and who did not. The cabin smelled of pine resin, old smoke, and drying wool. A small fire crackled in the stone hearth, throwing amber light across the rough-hewn walls. Near the fire lay Buddy, a 7-year-old German Shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and the heavy-boned frame of a dog bred for work rather than show. His muzzle had begun to gray, and a faint scar ran along his flank, half hidden beneath dense fur. Buddy had once been a military working dog trained for patrol and detection, and though retirement had slowed his stride, it had not dulled his instincts. Man and dog shared the same silence, the kind that came not from peace, but from familiarity with danger. They were survivors of different kinds of battles, bound by routine, rather than affection, by trust earned, rather than spoken. Outside, the storm worsened. Wind battered the cabin walls, snow hissing against shuttered windows. Michael moved with methodical calm, securing the last latch, checking the generator, stacking one more line of split wood. He respected storms the way other men respected weapons. Then Buddy rose. The dog did not bark. He never did, unless there was no alternative. Instead, his body stiffened, ears lifting, head angled toward the door. The change was immediate and absolute. His breathing slowed. His tail went rigid. He stared into the wood as if it were no barrier at all. Michael felt the shift register deep in his chest, an old reflex stirring. Buddy had done this before overseas, seconds before ambushes, seconds before the world broke open. Michael followed the dog's gaze, listening not with his ears, but with the quiet discipline that had once kept men alive. Easy Michael muttered, though he did not move to sit the dog back down. He trusted Buddy more than he trusted memory. The wind screamed louder, rattling the eaves. Going outside now was a calculated risk one Michael would have avoided if this were only about weather. At his age, exposure killed faster. He hesitated, one hand on the door frame, the other tightening around his scarf. Buddy looked back at him, then amber eyes, sharp and unyielding. There was urgency there, but not panic. a certainty that did not allow delay. Michael opened the door. Cold struck like a physical blow, tearing heat from skin-stealing breath. Snow drove sideways needles of ice, stinging his face. Buddy surged forward immediately, head-low paws cutting through drifts with practiced efficiency. Michael followed, boots crunching every step deliberate. The forest swallowed them within seconds. Visibility collapsed to a few yards trees, looming and vanishing like ghosts. Michael oriented by instinct, counting steps, marking shapes. He had learned long ago that disorientation was as lethal as bullets. Buddy slowed near a stand of towering pines. He veered left, then stopped beneath a massive spruce, whose branches sagged under ice. Michael's flashlight cut through the snow beam, shaking once before steadying. He swept the ground, then lifted the light upward, and the breath left his lungs in a silent rush. Two women hung from the tree. They were suspended by ropes, looped over a thick, ice-coated branch, wrists bound above their heads. Their boots hovered inches above the snow bodies, slumped forward under their own weight. Both were clearly adults, likely in their 30s. They wore ranger uniforms, torn and stiff with frost fabric darkened by ice and grime. One woman was taller and broad-shouldered, her build strong-shaped by physical labor. Her blonde hair, once braided, had come loose strands frozen against pale skin. Her face was lined not with fear but exhaustion, lips tinged blue, breath so shallow it could have been mistaken for stillness. The other woman was smaller, leaner, with sharper angles. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks in frozen strands, eyelashes rimed white. Her skin was lighter, drawn tight by cold, but her breathing, though faint, came faster, stubbornly regular. Buddy moved closer and let out a low, restrained growl, positioning himself directly beneath them. Body angled protectively. His presence was deliberate, as if he could hold them upright through will alone. Michael scanned the tree line instinctively, noting the absence of struggle marks the compressed snow beneath the trunk, the clean efficiency of the knots. This was not an accident, not wildlife. This was intention. Michael's thoughts narrowed, shedding memory and doubt. He felt the old focus settle in, heavy and unwelcome, but clear. Someone had done this. Someone had left them here for winter to finish the job. He reached for his knife, already calculating weight rope tension order of release. Snow continued to fall, indifferent and relentless. Buddy's growl deepened, a warning carried low in his chest. Michael stood there for one frozen moment, the storm screaming around him, two lives hanging above his head, and the sudden understanding that the forest was no longer empty. Whatever had brought him to this place had not finished yet. The most dangerous thing out here was not the cold. The storm followed them to the cabin, pressing against the logs with relentless force, wind dragging snow across the clearing until the world narrowed to the weak glow of a single porch light. Michael Turner moved with practiced urgency, hauling the first woman through the door, while the second stumbled behind him, half-carried, half-guided. Inside the cabin, swallowed sound trading the scream of wind for the crackle of fire and the heavy rasp of human breath struggling back from the edge. Michael shut the door with his shoulder, drove the bolt home, and turned immediately to the women without pausing to strip off his coat. Years ago, hesitation had cost lives. He did not repeat that mistake. The taller woman collapsed first. She was solidly built, broad through the shoulders and hips, the body of someone accustomed to hauling gear through deep snow and steep terrain. Her name, he would learn, was Laura Bennett. At 38, she carried the marks of long service outdoors, weathered skin, tanned even beneath winter pallor hands, thickened by rope axe handles and cold metal. Her blonde hair, cut just below the shoulders, was matted with ice and dirt, her face slack with exhaustion rather than fear. Even unconscious, there was a hardness to her posture, as though surrender was not something her body understood. The second woman, Rachel Moore, was smaller and leaner, her frame wiry rather than powerful. At 34, she looked younger than her age, not from softness but from sharpness. Her dark hair was pulled into a practical knot at the nape of her neck, strands escaping to cling to her cheeks. Her skin was pale, lips cracked and blue from cold, but her eyes fluttered open even as Michael eased her down. They were dark, alert, and cataloging the room despite shock. She had the gaze of someone trained to notice patterns, to register details, even when the body failed. Michael stripped off his gloves and went to work. He cut away frozen fabric, replaced it with dry wool, and thermal blankets, positioned them near the hearth, but not close enough to shock their systems. He moved efficiently. Hands, steady breath, controlled the old rhythm returning whether he welcomed it or not. Buddy followed him step for step, the German shepherd's large frame placing itself instinctively between the women and the draft seeping from the door. The dog lay down beside them, pressing his thick black and tan coat against their legs, radiating warmth like a living barrier. At 7 years old, Buddy was no longer reckless, but his instincts remained sharp, his amber eyes never fully leaving the door. Laura remained unconscious longer. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, her pulse faint but present. Michael monitored her carefully, rubbing warmth back into her hands until color crept reluctantly into her knuckles. Rachel shook as circulation returned in painful waves, teeth chattering, muscles tightening. Michael spoke to her in a low, even tone, grounding her without demanding responses. He had learned long ago that survival was not loud. Minutes stretched into an hour. Outside, the storm battered the cabin, but inside, heat slowly reclaimed ground. Rachel's breathing steadied first. She pushed herself upright slightly before Michael guided her back down, firm but not unkind. She obeyed, though her eyes never stopped moving. "You're safe," Michael said finally, when her gaze locked onto his. His voice was rough, unused, but steady. Rachel swallowed. "Safe," she repeated quietly, testing the word as if it might break. Laura stirred next, a low sound in her throat, jaw tightening as consciousness fought its way back. Her eyes opened slowly, pale blue and unfocused at first, then sharpening as she took in the room. Her gaze flicked to Rachel, then to Michael, then to Buddy. She tensed instinctively, shoulders lifting despite weakness. "Easy," Michael said. "You're out of the storm." Laura exhaled hard, a sound halfway between relief and anger. "Didn't think we'd make it?" she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Rachel closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "They didn't expect us to." The words settled heavily in the cabin. Michael said nothing, but he felt the truth of them. This had not been a warning. It had been an erasure. When Laura and Rachel were strong enough to speak, the story came out in fragments stitched together by shared understanding. Laura had been a ranger for over a decade, assigned to backcountry patrols where terrain did more damage than people. She trusted preparation over optimism, instinct over protocol, a mindset shaped years earlier when a sudden rock slide had killed a colleague beside her. Since then, she believed survival belonged to those who noticed what others dismissed. Rachel's path had been different. She had come up through environmental data analysis, satellite imaging, and mapping, trained to see movement where none was supposed to exist. She noticed patterns others labeled anomalies. Together, they had found something wrong in the national forest. Unauthorized extraction routes masked by storms, vehicle tracks appearing and vanishing, timber cut too cleanly, too efficiently. When they began cross-checking reports, files disappeared, GPS logs reset, requests stalled. Silence replaced resistance. They had taken their findings offline, planning to escalate beyond local channels. That was when they were taken. They didn't threaten us. Rachel said, her voice quiet but controlled. They didn't ask for anything. Laura's jaw tightened. They didn't need to. They knew Winter would finish it. Michael listened without interrupting, his mind assembling the implications with cold clarity. Someone had access. Someone had authority. This was not the work of desperate men cutting corners. This was maintenance. Buddy shifted, lifting his head as if sensing the change in atmosphere. His ears angled toward the back wall, nose lifting slightly. Michael noticed immediately. He did not look outside yet. There would be time for that. Rachel pulled the blanket tighter around herself. They didn't leave us there to scare us, she said. They left us there so we wouldn't come back. Laura met Michael's gaze, something hard and resolute in her expression, despite exhaustion. We weren't silenced, she said. We were erased. The fire cracked, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm showed no sign of easing. Michael looked at the two women, then at the door, then at Buddy, whose body remained angled protectively toward the threat he alone seemed to feel. He understood then that bringing them here had not ended anything. It had only delayed what was coming. Night tightened around the cabin as the storm shifted wind, lowering its pitch, while snow continued to fall in a steady, suffocating veil. Michael Turner felt the change before he saw it. The forest grew quieter in the wrong way, the kind of silence that followed intent rather than weather. Buddy sensed it first. The German shepherd rose from his place by the hearth muscles, coiling beneath his thick black and tan coat ears, angling toward the north-facing wall. At 7 years old, Buddy moved with the deliberate economy of experience, not the reckless urgency of youth. His amber eyes fixed on something Michael could not yet hear, his breathing slowing to a measured cadence that signaled focus, not fear. Michael stood and reached for his jacket without speaking. He moved through the cabin, checking shutters, light sources, angles. Laura Bennett and Rachel Moore watched from their blankets, exhaustion etched into their faces, but awareness sharp. Laura, tall and broad-shouldered, pushed herself upright, despite lingering weakness, jaw set with the stubborn resolve of someone who refused to be helpless. Rachel remained still, dark eyes tracking Michael's movements, her mind already working ahead of her body. Buddy growled low, the sound barely audible beneath the wind. Michael opened the back door just enough to slide into the cold. The storm bit immediately, but visibility had improved by a narrow margin. Snow still fell, but the wind had scoured certain surfaces clean, revealing details it had hidden hours earlier. Michael crouched near the steps and brushed away loose powder with a gloved hand. His fingers froze instantly, but what they uncovered burned hotter than the cold. A thin wire stretched taut at ankle height, nearly invisible against shadowed wood, leading to a compact device half buried beneath ice-packed soil. Crude construction, lethal intent. This was not intimidation. This was termination. Michael disabled the trap with practiced speed, isolating the charge without triggering it, then scanned the perimeter wider. He found more signs as he moved compressed snow where wind should have erased it. Boot impressions spaced for stability rather than haste, the faint chemical tang of oil carried on fabric. Whoever had come here understood winter. They were not locals stumbling into danger. They were professionals. Inside the cabin, Buddy shifted position, placing his body squarely between the women and the door. Laura's gaze followed the dog's posture, recognition dawning. She had seen this stance before in working dogs the moment when play and rest vanished entirely. "They're coming back," she said quietly. Michael did not answer. He did not need to. The first shot cracked through the storm, without warning, the report sharp and controlled. Wood splintered near the window frame, inches from where Michael had stood moments earlier. He dropped flat-rolled, and returned fire not to strike flesh, but to command space, sending rounds into the snowbank beyond the tree line. The response came quickly, disciplined bursts probing rather than panicking. These men were testing defenses, mapping reactions. Buddy braced shoulders squared, ready to intercept anything that breached the threshold. Rachel pressed herself deeper into the cabin's interior, pulling Laura with her following Michael's earlier instructions without question. Michael moved laterally, using the cabin's structure as cover, drawing attention away from the women. He opened the door just long enough to throw himself into the storm, then vanished into the tree's boots, finding purchase where ice betrayed the untrained. The forest closed around him. Snow swallowed sound, but not movement. Michael circled wide, reading the terrain the way he once read streets under fire, counting steps, tracking shadows. One figure advanced too quickly, confidence overtaking caution. The man slipped on ice-hardened ground momentum, carrying him forward. Michael closed the distance in seconds, colliding low and hard. The impact knocked breath loose, sending both men into the snow. Michael's weight pinned him there, forearm locking across the attacker's throat with precise restraint rather than rage. Up close, the man was younger than Michael expected, mid-30s at most, lean and angular. His face was sharp cheekbones, pronounced a short beard, framing a mouth set in calculation even in defeat. His eyes were pale and alert, not wild. He wore dark, insulated layers designed for endurance, rather than speed-reinforced gloves, boots meant for long travel. This was hired competence, not desperation. "Don't," the man rasped, breath fogging weakly. It was not a plea. It was an assessment. Michael secured him quickly, zip ties biting into fabric, then searched him with efficiency. He found a compact communication device sealed against moisture, its surface scratched from use. The screen pulsed faintly, cycling through encrypted bursts. Michael shut it down and scanned the stored data, recognizing patterns instantly. Coordinates converged toward a narrow corridor farther north, a route that cut through restricted land, where storms masked movement and oversight thinned. A transit line, a supply artery. The remaining attackers withdrew once their advantage collapsed, melting back into the trees with practiced discipline. They did not shout, they did not chase, they recalculated. The forest swallowed them without ceremony, leaving only the storm and the restrained man gasping in the snow. Michael dragged the captive into cover near the cabin's foundation, securing him out of sight and weather. The man said nothing, jaw-clenched eyes tracking Michael's hands. He had the stillness of someone trained to endure discomfort without complaint, a trait Michael recognized too well. Inside Buddy's posture did not relax when Michael returned. The dog sniffed the air, then pressed close to the women again. Vigilance unbroken. Rachel met Michael's gaze from the dim light near the hearth, understanding clear despite exhaustion. Laura's shoulders squared, pain forgotten. For the moment, her attention fixed on the door, as if willing the threat to show itself again. Michael knelt and spoke quietly. "They won't stop," he said, not as a warning but as a statement of fact. "They'll try to finish it." Rachel nodded once. "Then leaving won't make this safer." Michael felt the weight settle fully, then the choice he had tried to bury under distance and snow. He could take them and run, disappear deeper into the wilderness, hope winter erased everything else. Or he could stay and refuse erasure. He looked at Buddy, who watched him with unwavering focus, and then at the two women who had been left to die, not because they were wrong, but because they were right. "If I walk away," Michael said quietly, "no one stops this." Outside, the storm pressed in, indifferent and relentless. Inside the cabin, resolve hardened. Michael Turner did not reach for vengeance. He reached for responsibility, knowing exactly what it would cost. Dawn arrived as a thinning of darkness, the storm loosening its grip just enough to sharpen edges rather than soften them, snow still falling in a quiet, persistent veil. Michael Turner chose the timing carefully. The night had scrubbed tracks clean, gifting concealment at the cost of cold that burned deeper with every breath. He moved first through the timber shoulders, squared beneath his dark brown leather jacket, gray scarf tight against his throat, breath controlled. Behind him followed Laura Bennett and Rachel Moore, bodies wrapped in layered insulation movements economical. Buddy ranged ahead and back the German shepherd's thick coat dusted with frost paws, finding purchase on ice and stone as if the terrain itself had been memorized into muscle. The canyon revealed itself, gradually walls rising like frozen teeth and narrowing the sky to a pale ribbon. It was a natural choke point, a place where sound carried and escape collapsed. Michael read it the way he once read urban alleys under fire, noting tire scars etched faintly into ice. Snow drifted where engines had passed recently, rather than erased. Laura scanned the ground with a ranger's eye, broad shoulders steady despite lingering pain. Blonde hair pulled back tight, weathered skin pale in the cold. Years of backcountry patrol had taught her to trust what the land said over what reports claimed. Rachel worked beside her smaller and leaner dark hair, bound neatly, eyes fixed on her equipment. She secured a compact camera against vibration calibrating lenses for identifiers rather than faces. Proof mattered more than spectacle. Michael signaled, and they slipped into cover along a rock shelf overlooking the corridor. Buddy settled into a low crouch near the narrowest bend, muscles coiled without tension, amber eyes fixed forward. The forest held its breath. The first sign came as vibration through stone, rather than sound, a low tremor that resolved into engines as headlights pierced the bend. 2 heavy-duty trucks emerged, modified for cold beams angled down to avoid distant reflection. Exhaust plumed white. Men moved around the vehicles with practiced efficiency silhouettes layered in dark, insulated gear, faces obscured postures economical and unhurried. Michael counted spacing and angles. These were not opportunists. They were accustomed to working where authority thinned. He shifted just enough to draw attention, then withdrew along a line he knew would compress pursuit toward the canyon's tightest stretch. The tactic worked. 2 figures advanced cautiously, rifles raised but controlled. At Michael's signal, Buddy broke cover not in a reckless charge, but as a sudden, decisive presence that cut across the escape line. The dog's timing forced hesitation, turning confidence inward, where footing betrayed it. Rachel worked the lens with steady hands, capturing plates marking serials etched into metal rather than uniforms. Laura placed discreet beacons where spinning tires churned snow, the devices disappearing beneath slush without notice. The canyon amplified everything, now engine roar, the metallic snap of weapons coming to bear, breath scraping lungs. Michael pressed the advantage, drawing the group deeper into the bend where maneuverability collapsed and options narrowed. The arrival of federal lights transformed night into stark exposure. White beams flared at both ends of the canyon vehicles, blocking exits with deliberate placement. Doors opened in unison. Figures moved with rehearsed clarity. The lead agent stepped forward, a tall man in his early 40s with a square build and a face weathered by long field assignments rather than desks. His beard was trimmed close hair, dark and receding posture, calm with the weight of authority that did not need to announce itself. He was followed by a woman a few years younger, compact and athletic hair pulled into a tight bun beneath her cap. Eyes sharp and patient, the look of someone who dismantled systems piece by piece. The team fanned out angles, covered weapons, trained without haste. The canyon locked down cleanly. Michael withdrew to cover, maintaining overwatch while the perimeter closed. Buddy returned to his side chest, heaving once, before settling vigilance tempered by completion rather than relief. Rachel lowered her camera only when the scene stabilized, cataloging alignment and placement, as if imprinting it into memory. Laura straightened shoulders, lifting with the release of held tension gaze, fixed on the seized trucks where concealed compartments were already being exposed under scrutiny. Snow continued to fall, softening outlines without obscuring them. There were no cheers, no raised voices. The operation concluded with methodical restraint. Individuals were secured vehicles, immobilized evidence preserved where it stood. Among those led away was the internal facilitator, uncovered through layered records and recovered data, a man whose authority had once been accepted as protection rather than questioned. He was middle-aged, broad, through the chest hair thinning, and prematurely gray, a face shaped by comfort more than endurance. His downfall came not from panic, but from routine patterns repeated too often, assumptions made too confidently. Michael observed from the ridge, neither intervening nor retreating, the familiar distance settling between him and resolution. Accountability was not revenge, it was restoration. Laura stood beside Rachel, now taller and broader scar along her brow, catching the light, briefly a reminder of past loss, balanced by present outcome. Rachel assisted with final documentation movements, precise, despite fatigue expression, clear and quiet vindication without witnesses. When the federal team consolidated control, Michael signaled withdrawal. Laura retrieved the last beacon, leaving nothing behind that would betray their presence. Rachel secured her equipment data, redundant now, yet essential. Buddy took point on the return posture, easing only slightly. The canyon receded behind them, walls closing back into shadow, as if the land itself were sealing a wound. The network had been caught not by force alone, but by timing and terrain turned honest. They moved on through thinning snow, aware the hunt had reached its apex and passed. What remained was aftermath, and the quieter work of ensuring the truth did not freeze over again. The storm kept falling indifferent as justice stood without ceremony. Morning returned without ceremony, the storm finally loosening its grip as pale light filtered through thinning clouds and settled gently across the snow-covered forest. The valley outside the cabin lay quiet, not empty, but resting the way land does after violence has passed through it. Snow still fell in light, deliberate flakes, softening the sharp edges left behind by engines, boots, and gunfire. Michael Turner stood on the porch, breath-steady shoulders relaxed beneath his old dark brown leather jacket. The gray wool scarf was wrapped the same way it always had been, but the man inside it wasn't standing guard against memory anymore. He was simply present. Inside the cabin, Laura Bennett and Rachel Moore prepared to leave. Their movements were calm and unhurried, shaped by habit rather than urgency. Laura, tall and broad-shouldered, moved with the grounded confidence of someone long accustomed to responsibility. The deep fatigue in her muscles had not fully faded, but her posture was upright, her pale blue eyes clear. Her blonde hair was braided tightly again, practical and controlled, framing a face weathered by wind and sun rather than softened by comfort. Years in the backcountry had taught her that dignity did not require witnesses. Survival had sharpened her, not hardened her. Rachel packed her equipment carefully, fingers precise, despite lingering stiffness. Smaller and leaner than Laura, she carried herself with an inward focus, dark eyes, attentive to detail even now. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, her expression composed, reflective. She had always trusted patterns more than reassurance data, more than promises. Seeing the truth exposed had not brought triumph, only confirmation. Truth endured quietly, the way cold did the way mountains did. They did not speak much. There was nothing left to explain. When the door opened, Buddy rose immediately and padded outside, his thick black and tan coat catching the light as he stepped into fresh snow. At 7 years old, his movements were strong, but measured confidence replacing urgency. He ran ahead briefly, carving clean arcs through untouched white, then circled back toward Michael as if to confirm direction before bounding forward again. His tail cut steady lines through the air. There was joy there, but not recklessness. Assurance, not celebration. Laura stopped at the edge of the porch and looked back once. "You staying?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Michael nodded. His pale eyes were steady, the distant edge softened into something quieter. "This place needs someone who won't disappear," he said. Rachel met his gaze, understanding, immediate and unspoken. She extended a gloved hand, firm and brief. "Thank you," she said. Not for saving their lives alone, but for refusing to let the truth freeze again. Their departure was quiet. No ceremony. No promises to stay in touch. Just nods exchanged respect, carried in distance rather than words. As Laura and Rachel disappeared down the tree-lined trail, their figures gradually swallowed by snow and shadow, Michael felt no sense of loss. Only completion. The cabin remained. Michael spent the days that followed repairing what had been damaged. He replaced splintered logs where rounds had struck reinforced weak points, resealed shutters. His movements were steady, deliberate, guided by function rather than appearance. He worked until his muscles burned, and then worked a little longer, not to punish himself, but to ground himself in the rhythm of effort. The smell of fresh-cut wood mixed with pine resin and smoke. Each repair was an act of staying. Buddy remained close, resting in the sun when it broke through the clouds, rising instantly whenever Michael shifted position. The dog watched the forest without tension, now vigilance tempered by completion. When night fell, Buddy lay near the hearth again, his breathing slow and even ears lifting only when the wind changed pitch. He no longer expected the storm to bring threats. He was ready if it did. Michael slept more deeply than he had in years, not without dreams, but without the weight of avoidance. The war he had carried had not vanished, but it no longer demanded escape. It had found direction. On the final morning of winter's retreat, the sky opened into a pale, endless blue. Sunlight scattered across the valley, igniting the snow into quiet brilliance. Michael stepped outside and stopped, taking in the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the balance of it. Wind through branches. Buddy's paws crunching softly. His own breath steady and clean in his lungs. He did not feel the pull to leave. No urge to push farther north or bury himself deeper in isolation. The forest no longer felt like a refuge from responsibility. It felt like a trust. Buddy ran ahead once more, unburdened whole, then turned and waited, amber eyes bright with expectation. Michael smiled faintly, the expression unfamiliar but genuine. He followed. Michael Turner had not come to Montana to be a guardian. He had come to disappear. But when the moment arrived, when the choice returned, whether he wanted it or not, he had chosen to remain. Not as a hero, not as a symbol, but as a man who refused to look away when looking away would have been easier. Not everyone who is saved becomes an example. Not every story ends in recognition. But every choice not to turn away leaves something standing where silence once waited. In that understanding, amid repaired walls and fresh snow, Michael found a version of peace that did not ask him to run. This story reminds us that miracles do not always arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly through a man who refuses to look away, through a loyal companion who senses danger before words exist, or through a moment when courage is chosen over comfort. God's work often moves through ordinary people placed in extraordinary situations, not because they are perfect, but because they are willing. In our daily lives, we may never face a blizzard in the Montana wilderness, but we all encounter moments when someone nearby needs help, protection, or truth. Those moments are tests of the same kind. If this story touched your heart, let it be a reminder that faith is not only believing, it is acting when silence would be easier. Please share this story with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment with your thoughts or prayer requests, and subscribe to the channel so these stories can reach more hearts. May God bless you, watch over you, and guide you through every storm you face.